The fluorescent lights of the emergency department hummed with a low mechanical vibration. It was a sound that most people stopped hearing after their first week on the floor. Evelyn Hale heard it every single second. She heard the lights. She heard the rhythmic, hydraulic hiss of the transport doors opening and closing. She heard the squeak of rubber soles on the freshly waxed linoleum. She heard the irregular, wet breathing of the man in Trauma Bay 3. Evelyn stood near the nurse's station, her posture slightly stooped, her shoulders rounded inward like a wilted flower. She wore faded blue scrubs that hung loosely on her thin frame. Her gray hair was pulled back into a tight, severe bun at the nape of her neck. To the casual observer, she was just a frail, aging nurse riding out the final years before retirement. She was the woman who quietly restocked the gauze. She was the woman who emptied the bedpans without complaint. She was a ghost haunting the periphery of the trauma center. That was exactly how she wanted it. Invisibility was a shield. Invisibility kept the memories at bay. It kept the smell of burning diesel and copper blood from flooding her senses. It kept the ghosts of the Korangal Valley buried deep beneath layers of sterile hospital routine. Evelyn slowly wiped down the counter with a bleach wipe. The sharp chemical scent of the antiseptic stung her nostrils. It was a clean smell. It was a safe smell. It was nothing like the smell of a medevac chopper hot on the landing zone. Her hands moved in slow, deliberate circles over the faux wood grain of the desk. Her knuckles were thick, the joints swollen. The younger nurses whispered that it was severe arthritis. They offered to open medicine bottles for her. They offered to lift the heavier patients. Evelyn always accepted their help with a meek, trembling smile and a soft word of thanks. She never corrected them. She never told them that the thickness in her knuckles was calcified bone from years of striking heavy bags and human targets. She never told them that her hands were registered as lethal weapons in 3 different classified databases. She never told them that she had spent 20 years as a Tier 1 Special Operations combat medic. To them, she was just Evelyn. Sweet, slow, fragile Evelyn. The double doors of the ambulance bay crashed open. The cold night air swept into the trauma corridor, bringing with it the scent of rain and wet asphalt. 2 paramedics sprinted through the gap, pushing a blood-slicked gurney. The wheels of the gurney rattled violently against the floor tiles. "Gunshot wound to the chest," the lead paramedic shouted. His voice was hoarse, ragged with adrenaline. "Male, mid-20s, multiple entry wounds, pressure is dropping." The emergency room erupted into a controlled chaos. Nurses swarmed the gurney like bees defending a hive. Evelyn did not run. She stepped back, pressing her spine against the wall, flattening herself out of the way. Her eyes, however, did not miss a single detail. Her gaze tracked over the patient with the terrifying precision of a targeting laser. She noted the pale, ashen color of his skin. She saw the rapid, shallow rise and fall of his unbroken ribs. She observed the dark, frothy blood bubbling from the makeshift pressure dressing on his right pectoral muscle. Tension pneumothorax. His lung was collapsing, filling the chest cavity with air and crushing his heart. He had minutes, maybe less. Dr. Julian Vance strode into the trauma bay. He did not run. Dr. Vance never ran. He walked with the swagger of a man who believed he owned the building and everyone inside it. He was 32 years old, fresh out of a prestigious residency program. His scrubs were tailored. His dark hair was styled with expensive pomade that caught the harsh fluorescent light. He wore a stethoscope around his neck like a medallion of ultimate authority. "What do we have?" Vance asked, his voice dripping with bored condescension. He snapped his latex gloves onto his wrists with a sharp, echoing crack. "Gunshot to the upper right quadrant, doctor," the paramedic panted, stepping back. "Heart rate is 140. Blood pressure is 80/40. Vance stepped up to the table. He looked down at the bleeding young man with mild distaste. "Gangbanger," Vance muttered under his breath. Evelyn heard him. Her jaw tightened infinitesimally. A microscopic shift of muscle beneath her wrinkled skin. "Let us get a chest tube ready," Vance ordered loudly, projecting his voice for the room to hear. "Standard protocol. Give me 50 of fentanyl and let us prep the lateral side." Evelyn watched the monitor. The lines were jumping erratically. The oxygen saturation numbers were plummeting in free fall. 85, 80, 76. A standard chest tube would take too long. By the time Vance made the incision, spread the ribs, and guided the thick plastic tubing into the pleural space, the patient would be in irreversible cardiac arrest. The man needed a needle decompression. Immediately. Evelyn took a slow, hesitant step forward. She kept her head bowed, her voice soft and trembling. "Excuse me, Dr. Vance," she murmured. Her tone was apologetic, almost whining. "His trachea is deviating to the left. His jugular veins are distended." Vance paused. He turned his head slowly, fixing Evelyn with a glare of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Are you diagnosing my patient, Evelyn?" he asked. His words were slow, heavy with sarcasm. "No, doctor," she stammered, shrinking back into her posture of frailty. "I just noticed the signs of a tension pneumothorax. Perhaps a needle—" "I know what the signs are, you senile old bat," Vance snapped. The room went dead silent. The other nurses froze, their eyes darting nervously between the arrogant doctor and the meek older woman. "I am the chief resident here," Vance declared, his voice rising in volume. "You are a glorified bedpan cleaner. You fetch blankets. You do not practice medicine." He pointed a gloved finger directly at her face. "Do not ever question me in my trauma bay again. Do you understand?" Evelyn looked at the floor. She let her shoulders sag even further. "Yes, Dr. Vance," she whispered. "I am sorry." "Go restock the supply closet," he barked, turning his back on her. "Get out of my sight before you cause a real problem." Evelyn turned and shuffled away. Her gait was slow, unsteady, the perfect picture of an intimidated old woman. But as she turned, her eyes flicked to the supply cart. With a movement so fast and smooth it defied human perception, she slipped a 14-gauge angiocatheter needle into the deep pocket of her scrap top. No one saw it. The movement was a ghost, a phantom echo of a life spent moving faster than the speed of thought. She walked into the dimly lit supply closet and pulled the door partially shut. Through the narrow crack, she watched the trauma bay. Vance was struggling. He had the scalpel, but his hands were shaking. He was trying to locate the correct intercostal space, but the patient was thrashing in the throes of oxygen starvation. "Hold him down!" Vance yelled at the nurses. "I cannot make the cut if he keeps moving." The monitor began to scream, a high-pitched, continuous tone of impending doom. The heart rate was dropping now. Bradycardia. The heart muscle was suffocating, giving up the fight. Vance froze. He stood over the table, scalpel in hand, staring at the dropping numbers. His medical school textbooks had not prepared him for the visceral, terrifying reality of a man dying violently under his hands. He was a paper tiger. He had the credentials, the title, the arrogance, but he lacked the cold iron core required to function in the abyss. Evelyn felt the familiar icy calm wash over her. It was a feeling she had suppressed for 10 years. It was the coldness of the operator, the absolute detached focus of a predator stepping into the Q zone. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. She was no longer in a sterile hospital in Chicago. She was in the back of a stripped-down Humvee in Fallujah. She was waist-deep in swamp water in Colombia. She was Wraith. She opened her eyes. The frailty vanished. Her spine snapped straight. Her shoulders rolled back, revealing a broad, muscular frame hidden beneath the baggy scrubs. Her face, usually slack and agreeable, hardened into a mask of carved granite. She stepped out of the supply closet. She did not shuffle. She moved with the silent, gliding stride of a stalking panther. Before she could reach the trauma bay, the heavy metal doors of the waiting room burst open. The sound was like a bomb detonating in the quiet corridor. 4 men walked into the emergency department. They did not look like patients. They moved with aggressive, sweeping motions, their eyes scanning the room for threats. They wore heavy dark coats, despite the mild weather outside. Their faces were hard, scarred, and completely devoid of empathy. The lead man, a towering brute with a neck tattoo of a coiled serpent, pulled a heavy black semi-automatic pistol from his waistband. He racked the slide. The metallic clack echoed through the room. "Nobody moves!" the tattooed man roared. His voice was thunder. "Nobody makes a sound or I start dropping bodies right here on the floor." The hospital erupted into a cacophony of terror. Nurses screamed, patients in the hallway dived for cover beneath plastic chairs. The security guard at the front desk reached for his radio, but one of the thugs raised a short-barreled shotgun and fired a blast into the ceiling. Plaster and dust rained down like dirty snow. The guard froze, raising his hands in terrified surrender. The four men moved with practiced efficiency. They were a hit squad. They had come to finish the job they started on the street. They wanted the boy in Trauma Bay 3. The tattooed leader pointed his pistol at the terrified triage nurse. "Where is the gunshot victim?" he demanded. "The one who just came in. Where is he?" The nurse sobbed, pointing a shaking finger toward the back corridor. "Trauma 3, she choked out. "Down the hall." The four men marched down the corridor. They kicked open the doors to the trauma bay. Dr. Vance dropped his scalpel. It clattered loudly against the bloody linoleum floor. Vance backed away from the operating table, his hands raised high above his head. His face was completely drained of color. He looked like a terrified child. The arrogance, the swagger, the booming authority were entirely gone. He was nothing but raw, unfiltered panic. The four armed men fanned out, surrounding the trauma bed. They boxed in Dr. Vance and a young, terrified nurse named Sarah, and they boxed in Evelyn. Evelyn had slipped into the room just as the thugs entered. She stood perfectly still in the corner, her hands resting lightly at her sides. She had instantly reverted to her frail old woman persona. She hunched her shoulders, let her head droop, and allowed her hands to tremble violently. She looked like a terrified, helpless victim. She was completely ignored. The tattooed leader stepped up to the patient. The boy was unconscious, his lips blue, his chest barely moving. "Looks like he is already dying," the leader sneered. He raised his pistol, pointing it directly at the boy's forehead. "Let me help him along." "Please," Nurse Sarah begged, tears streaming down her face. "Please do not do this. He is just a kid." One of the other thugs, a wiry man with a twitching jaw, backhanded Sarah across the face. The crack of his hand against her cheek was sickeningly loud. Sarah crumpled to the floor, weeping. Vance screamed. It was a high, reedy sound of pure terror. "Do not hurt me," Vance shrieked, backing into the counter. "I have money. Take whatever you want. Take the drugs." The tattooed leader laughed. It was a cruel, grating sound. "We do not want your drugs, doctor," he said, stepping closer to Vance. "We want to make sure this rat does not talk to the police." Vance pointed a trembling finger at Evelyn. "Take her," Vance cried out, his voice cracking with desperation. "She has the keys to the narcotic lockbox. She is just an old nurse. Do whatever you want with her, just let me go." The room seemed to hold its breath. Sarah looked up from the floor, her eyes wide with horror at Vance's betrayal. The four thugs turned their attention to the hunched, trembling figure in the corner. The leader smirked. He walked slowly toward Evelyn, his gun lowered but ready. "Is that right, Grandma?" he mocked. "You got the keys to the candy store?" He reached out to grab her by the collar of her scrubs. He intended to drag her to the medication room. He intended to use her and discard her. He made a fatal mistake. He stepped inside her perimeter. Evelyn stopped trembling. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The frail old woman vanished, replaced by an apex predator. Her head snapped up. Her eyes, previously dull and frightened, were now cold, hard, and utterly dead. They were the eyes of a great white shark rolling back in the strike. The thug's hand was inches from her collar. Evelyn moved. She did not block his hand. She bypassed it completely. Her left hand shot forward, her thick, calcified knuckles driving directly into the man's throat. She struck the thyroid cartilage with the force of a swinging sledgehammer. There was a sickening crunch. The tattooed leader's eyes bulged from his skull. The smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of absolute, suffocating agony. His hands flew to his shattered windpipe. He could not scream. He could not breathe. He simply dropped to his knees, his gun clattering uselessly to the floor. The other three thugs froze. Their brains could not process what they had just witnessed. The frail, trembling old woman had just neutralized their leader in a fraction of a second. The cognitive dissonance paralyzed them for exactly 1 second. 1 second was a lifetime for Wraith. Evelyn stepped over the choking leader, her movements a blur of kinetic violence. She closed the distance to the wiry man who had struck Sarah. He tried to raise his shotgun. He was entirely too slow. Evelyn grabbed the barrel of the shotgun with her left hand, violently twisting it upward and away from her body. Simultaneously, she drove the heel of her right hand upward, catching the man flush under his chin. The impact snapped his head back with bone-breaking force. His jaws slammed together, shattering teeth. The brain rattled violently against the skull, instantly short-circuiting his central nervous system. He was unconscious before his body hit the linoleum. 2 down. The third man, standing near the foot of the bed, finally reacted. He raised a heavy revolver, aiming it at Evelyn's center of mass. "You crazy old..." he started to shout. Evelyn did not retreat. She advanced. She used the falling body of the wiry man as a momentary shield, stepping fluidly around him. As the third man fired, the bullet buried itself into the ceiling tiles. Evelyn was already inside his guard. She grabbed his gun hand by the wrist. With a brutal, twisting motion, she applied a standing wrist lock that tore the ligaments and snapped the radius bone. The man screamed, dropping the revolver. Evelyn did not pause. She maintained her grip on his broken wrist, pulled him off balance, and delivered a devastating knee strike to his floating ribs. The ribs cracked audibly. The man collapsed into a fetal position, gasping for air, completely incapacitated. 3 down. The fourth man, the largest of the group, was standing near the door. He saw his 3 companions utterly destroyed in less than 5 seconds. Panic seized him. He turned to run, to flee from the terrifying demon disguised as a nurse. Evelyn reached down, scooped up the fallen revolver from the floor, and threw it. She did not throw it to shoot. She threw it as a heavy, blunt projectile. The solid steel frame of the weapon struck the fleeing man squarely in the back of the head. He pitched forward, slamming face first into the heavy metal doorframe. He slid to the floor, leaving a smear of blood on the white paint. He did not move. 4 down. The entire sequence, from the first strike to the final falling body, took exactly 6 seconds. The trauma bay was silent, save for the wet, gurgling sounds of the leader choking on his own crushed airway. Dr. Vance was pressed against the wall, his eyes wide, his mouth hanging open in slack-jawed disbelief. He looked at the 4 armed thugs writhing or unconscious on the floor. Then he looked at Evelyn. She was not panting, she was not shaking. She stood amidst the carnage with the calm, relaxed posture of someone who had just finished sweeping the floor. Her face was completely devoid of emotion. She turned her attention away from the bodies and back to the operating table. The heart monitor was letting out a long, continuous tone. Flatline. The patient's heart had stopped. The tension pneumothorax had finally crushed the life out of him. Evelyn moved to the table. "Sarah," Evelyn said. Her voice was no longer the soft, trembling whisper of the old nurse. It was a low, hard baritone. It was a voice accustomed to commanding men in the absolute worst conditions on earth. It was a voice that demanded instant, unquestioning obedience. "Sarah, get up." Sarah scrambled to her feet, wiping blood from her split lip. She stared at Evelyn with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. "Yes, Evelyn," Sarah stammered. "Do not call me that," Evelyn commanded, her eyes locked on the dying patient. "Hand me the scalpel, the one that coward dropped." Sarah scrambled to the floor, picked up the bloody scalpel, and slapped it into Evelyn's waiting, rock-steady hand. Evelyn did not bother with the chest tube. There was no time. She pulled the 14-gauge needle from her scrap pocket. She plunged it directly into the second intercostal space on the patient's right side, perfectly bypassing the ribs and entering the pleural cavity. There was a loud, distinct hiss. It sounded like a tire deflating. Trapped air rushed out of the chest cavity, spraying a fine mist of blood into the air. The pressure on the heart was instantly relieved. "Start chest compressions," Evelyn barked at Sarah. Sarah immediately locked her hands together and began pumping the patient's chest. 1, 2, 3, 4, Sarah counted loudly. Evelyn looked at the monitor. Nothing. The heart needed a jump start. "Epinephrine," Evelyn ordered. She turned to Dr. Vance. Vance was still plastered against the wall, completely catatonic. "Vance!" Evelyn roared. The sound of her voice hit him like a physical blow. He flinched, pulling his arms over his head. "Get off the wall and push 1 milligram of epi, right now," Evelyn commanded. I, Vance stuttered, his eyes darting wildly. "Move," Evelyn snapped. Her voice cracked like a bullwhip. Vance stumbled forward, his hands shaking so badly he could barely open the crash cart. He fumbled with the pre-filled syringe, dropping the plastic cap on the floor. He managed to connect it to the IV line and push the medication. "Epi is in," Vance whispered, tears rolling down his cheeks. He was a broken man. His arrogance had been shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. He had offered up an innocent woman to save his own skin, and then he had watched that same woman do what he could not. He had watched her fight. He had watched her command. He was nothing compared to her. "Clear," Evelyn stated calmly. Sarah stopped compressions and stepped back. Evelyn watched the monitor. A second passed. 2 seconds. Then, a sharp spike appeared on the screen. Then another. The monitor began to beep. A steady, rhythmic, beautiful sound. Sinus tachycardia. The heart was beating again. The boy gasped, his chest heaving as the uncollapsed lung drew in a massive breath of air. His eyes fluttered open, rolling back in his head before settling on the ceiling. He was alive. Evelyn let out a slow, controlled breath. She set the scalpel down on the sterile tray. She looked down at her hands. They were covered in blood. The thick, calcified knuckles were stained red. She did not tremble. She felt the adrenaline slowly bleeding out of her system, leaving behind a familiar, heavy exhaustion. The doors to the trauma bay swung open again. This time it was the police. 6 armed officers flooded into the room, their weapons drawn, flashlights cutting through the dust-filled air. They stopped dead in their tracks. They looked at the 4 bodies scattered across the floor. They looked at the crushed throat of the leader. They looked at the shattered jaw of the wiry man. They looked at the broken arm and caved-in ribs of the 3rd. They looked at the bloody smear on the doorframe from the 4th. Then they looked at Dr. Vance, who was weeping uncontrollably in the corner. Finally, they looked at the frail, gray-haired nurse standing over the stabilized patient. A heavy-set police sergeant lowered his weapon. He looked around the room in absolute bewilderment. "What the hell happened here?" the sergeant asked. "Who did this?" Dr. Vance pointed a shaking, bloody finger at Evelyn. "She did," Vance sobbed. "She is a monster. She killed them." The sergeant looked at Evelyn. He looked at her faded scrubs. He looked at her grey bun. He looked at her stooped shoulders. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Her?" the sergeant asked. "This little old lady took down 4 armed gang members?" "It is the truth," Nurse Sarah said firmly. She stepped forward, wiping her face. She stood tall, placing herself between the police and Evelyn. "They came in to kill the patient. Dr. Vance tried to give Evelyn to them as a hostage, and then—" Sarah paused, searching for the right words. "And then she saved us all." A tall man in a dark suit pushed his way past the uniformed officers. He was not a local cop. He had the hard, disciplined look of a federal agent or military intelligence. He flashed a badge at the sergeant, then stepped into the center of the room. He looked at the bodies on the floor. He examined the specific nature of the injuries, the crushed windpipe, the snapped radius, the precise, lethal efficiency of the trauma. He slowly turned his head and looked at Evelyn. A look of deep, profound recognition crossed his face. He stood at attention. He snapped a crisp, perfect military salute. "Master Sergeant Hale," the man said. His voice was filled with absolute reverence. "It is an honor to finally meet you. I read the after-action reports from Operation Red Dawn. I know what you did in the valley." The room went dead silent again. The police officers stared. Nurse Sarah stared. Dr. Vance stopped crying and stared. Master Sergeant. Evelyn Hale looked at the man in the suit. She slowly, deliberately straightened her spine. She rolled her shoulders back. She did not return the salute, but she gave a single, sharp nod of acknowledgement. "I am retired, Agent," Evelyn said. Her voice was strong, clear, and resonant. "I am just a nurse now." "With all due respect, ma'am," the agent said, gesturing to the carnage on the floor. "You are a lot more than just a nurse. You are Wraith." Evelyn did not deny it. She looked over at Dr. Vance. Vance shrank back against the wall, trying to make himself as small as possible. He was terrified of her. He was terrified of the woman he had belittled, insulted, and tried to sacrifice. He knew that his career was over. He knew that his reputation was destroyed. He was a paper tiger who had finally met a real dragon. Dr. Vance, Evelyn said, her voice cut through the room like a scalpel. You are relieved of duty. Vance did not argue. He nodded rapidly, his face pale and slick with sweat. He scurried out of the trauma bay, slipping on the bloody floor as he ran, desperate to escape the consequences of his own cowardice. Evelyn turned back to the patient. The boy was stable. His color was returning. The monitor beeped a steady, reassuring rhythm. She had done her job. She had saved a life. She had protected her team. For the first time in 10 years, Evelyn felt a strange sense of peace. She did not have to hide anymore. She did not have to pretend to be frail. She did not have to shrink herself down to make arrogant men feel powerful. She was Master Sergeant Evelyn Hale. She was a healer. She was a warrior. She was both, and she would never apologize for it again. The cleanup took hours. The hospital administration was thrown into a frenzy of paperwork, police reports, and internal investigations. Dr. Vance was escorted from the premises by security. His medical license would be suspended pending a review of his cowardice and his dangerous medical negligence. He would never practice medicine in that city again. Evelyn sat in the break room, sipping a cup of lukewarm, bitter coffee. The adrenaline had completely faded, leaving behind the deep, aching soreness in her old bones. Her knuckles throbbed, her knees ached, but her mind was crystal clear. Nurse Sarah walked into the break room. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down across from Evelyn. Sarah looked at her with a mixture of respect and lingering awe. So, Sarah said softly, Wraith, huh? Evelyn offered a small, genuine smile. It was not the trembling, meek smile she used to wear. It was a strong, confident smile. It was a long time ago, Sarah, Evelyn said. A different life. You saved my life, Sarah said, her voice catching in her throat. You saved all of us, and you saved that boy. I did what I was trained to do, Evelyn replied simply. Well, Sarah said, raising her coffee cup, I am glad you are here, and I am glad you are not just a frail old nurse. Evelyn tapped her cup against Sarah's. Me too, Sarah, she said. Me too. The morning sun began to rise over the city, casting long, golden rays through the break room window. The storm had passed. The hospital settled into a new, quiet rhythm. It was a new day, a day where true competence was recognized, a day where the loud, fragile arrogance of men like Vance was replaced by the quiet, unshakable strength of a woman who knew exactly who she was. Evelyn Hale finished her coffee. She stood up. She did not stoop. She did not shuffle. She walked out of the break room with her head held high, her steps firm and purposeful. She was ready for the next shift. She was ready for whatever came through those double doors. Because she was no longer hiding in the shadows. She was the light in the dark. She was the shield against the chaos. She was Wraith. And she was exactly where she belonged. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the room is not the man with the gun or the doctor with the ego. Sometimes the most dangerous thing is the quiet person in the corner, the one who watches, the one who waits, the one who has survived the fire and learned how to control the flames. We spend so much of our lives trying to fit into boxes built by other people. We shrink ourselves down so we do not intimidate the insecure. We hide our scars because society tells us they are ugly. We suppress our strength because it makes the weak feel uncomfortable. But true power does not need to announce itself. True power does not need a title on a door or a custom-tailored suit. True power is radical competence. It is the ability to step into the chaos when everyone else is running away. It is the willingness to do the hard, brutal work of saving lives, even when no one is watching. Evelyn Hale taught us that the cost of hiding parts of yourself is simply too high. Survival is not the same as healing. You can survive by being invisible, but you can only heal by stepping into the light of your own truth. The bravest act is showing up as your whole self, scars, trauma, strength and all. Because when the crisis comes, and it always does, the world does not need paper tigers. The world needs the quiet professionals. The world needs the wraiths. Tell me in the comments, who is the person who listened to you when no one else would? Who saw your hidden strength when everyone else just saw your frailties? If this story of quiet power and ultimate vindication spoke to you, tap that like button. Leave a comment down below with your own story of overcoming underestimation. Subscribe so you never miss the next story. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own hidden strength. See you in the next one.